The sky above Valus 3 was a swirling storm of crimson and ash. Blackened trees clawed at the horizon, their skeletal branches reaching futilely toward distant stars. Rena crouched beneath the crumbling remains of a collapsed shelter, her small hands clutching a jagged piece of metal. It was her only weapon, though she knew it would do little against the human soldiers if they came for her. Humans. The word burned in her mind like acid. They were destroyers, plunderers who had brought death to her world. They had arrived on Valus 3 under the guise of explorers decades ago, only to strip it bare for its minerals and enslave her people, the Lycians. When the Lycians rebelled, the humans retaliated with fire and steel. Rena had no memory of her parents. They were just names whispered by her caretakers before the humans razed her village. She had been left alone, surviving on scraps and instincts. A faint hum pulled her from her thoughts. She tensed, her violet eyes narrowing. The hum grew louder, accompanied by the telltale thrum of a hovercraft. Her heart raced. Humans. Again. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her antennae flattening against her head. The craft descended, its searchlights cutting through the smoky air. A voice crackled over a loudspeaker. "We're here to help. If you're injured, come forward." Rena didn't believe it for a second. Help? From humans? Her people had learned to associate those words with traps. She stayed still, barely breathing. The hovercraft landed, its engines powering down. A figure emerged, clad in a tattered uniform with a red cross emblazoned on the arm. The man's face was pale, his expression weary. He carried a satchel slung over one shoulder and held his hands in the air to show he was unarmed. "My name is Eric," he called out. "I'm a medic. I've got food and medicine." Rena's grip on the metal shard tightened. She could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of a trap. But Eric didn't move like a soldier. His steps were slow, careful. She watched as he placed the satchel on the ground and took a step back. "Please," he said, his voice softer now. "I'm here to help anyone left." For a long moment, Rena stayed hidden, weighing her options. Finally, hunger and desperation pushed her forward. She emerged from the shadows, the jagged metal still clenched in her hand. Eric froze. "It's okay," he said, his hand still raised. "I won't hurt you." She didn't lower the shard. "Why are you here?" she demanded in her native tongue. To her surprise, he answered in halting Lycian. "To save lives." Rena's antennae twitched in suspicion, but she approached slowly. When she was close enough, Eric opened the satchel, revealing ration packs and medical supplies. Her stomach growled at the sight of the food, but she didn't reach for it. "You're lying," she said, her voice trembling. "Humans don't save lives. They destroy them." Eric's expression darkened, but not with anger. There was pain in his eyes. "Not all of us," he said quietly. "Please, let me help." Eric stayed for hours, tending to Rena's injuries and sharing his rations. She remained wary, her violet eyes watching his every move. He told her stories about his life, about Earth, a planet she had only heard of in whispered curses. He spoke of lush green forests, oceans that stretched beyond the horizon, and cities that sparkled with lights. "It wasn't always like this," he said one night, staring at the distant stars. "The war, it's changed everything." Rena snorted. "The war you started." Eric didn't argue. Instead, he sighed and looked away. "I'm sorry for what my people have done, but not all of us want this. Some of us just want to fix what's broken." For the first time, Rena hesitated. His words were different from the hatred she had always known. Still, she couldn't let herself trust him fully. Not yet. As days turned into weeks, Eric taught her how to treat wounds, purify water, and even pilot the small craft he had hidden in the nearby hills. In return, she showed him the hidden pathways of the forest and the ruins of her ancestors' cities. It was in one of these ruins that they found the first clue. The temple was ancient, its walls covered in intricate carvings that glowed faintly in the dark. Rena's people believed it was a sacred place, one of the last remnants of the Lycian civilization before the humans arrived. "This place," Eric whispered, running his fingers over the carvings. "It's incredible." Rena felt a swell of pride, but it was quickly overshadowed by a deep sadness. "It's all that's left of us," she said bitterly. They ventured deeper into the temple, the air growing colder with each step. At the heart of the structure, they found a chamber filled with strange machinery. Rena recognized the symbols etched into the consoles. They were the same as those on the pendant she wore around her neck, the only thing she had from her parents. "What is this?" Eric asked, his voice reverent. "I don't know," Rena admitted, "but it feels important." As she approached the central console, her pendant began to glow. The machinery hummed to life, filling the chamber with light. A holographic projection appeared, showing a star map and streams of data in both Lycian and a language Rena didn't recognize. Eric's eyes widened. "This isn't just Lycian tech," he said. This is human. Older than anything we've ever seen." The realization hit Rena like a thunderbolt. "You're lying," she hissed. "Why would our temple have your technology?" Eric shook his head. "I don't know, but we need to find out." The hologram revealed a hidden truth. The Lycians and humans shared a distant origin. Long ago, both species had been part of the same interstellar civilization. But a cataclysmic event had scattered them across the galaxy, severing their connection and erasing their shared history. The war between their peoples was not one of conquest, but of ignorance, a tragic cycle fueled by fear and misunderstanding. Rena's world tilted on its axis. Her hatred for humans, the pain of losing her family, all of it was built on a lie. Eric placed a hand on her shoulder. "You have a choice," he said gently. "We can let this truth die here, or we can use it to stop the war." Rena looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears. For the first time, she felt the weight of her own power, not as a weapon, but as a bridge between two worlds. The hologram faded, leaving an oppressive silence in the chamber. Rena clenched her fists, her mind spinning with the weight of the revelation. The war, decades of slaughter and suffering, was not born of malice but ignorance. The idea made her stomach churn. "We can't keep this here," Eric said, his voice resolute. "If this information gets out, it could change everything. Both sides need to know the truth." Rena turned to him, her antennae quivering with tension. "You think your leaders will care about this? They'll just bury it, like they buried us. The truth won't stop them." "It will if the right people hear it," Eric countered. "If your people, if both sides, realize they're fighting their own blood, it could be enough to stop the fighting." Rena stared at him, doubt clouding her mind. The hatred she had carried her whole life felt like a jagged blade in her chest. Could her people forgive? Could she? Eric knelt by the console, examining the symbols and star maps. "This temple is a beacon," he said, running his fingers over the grooves in the machinery. "It's part of a network. If we activate the others, it might transmit this data to the entire sector. They'll all see the truth at once." "How do you know that?" Rena asked, her voice sharp. Eric hesitated, guilt flashing across his face. "Because I've seen something like this before, on a derelict station near Earth. My leaders found it years ago and locked it away. They didn't want anyone asking questions." "You knew?" Rena's voice rose, the jagged edge of betrayal cutting through it. "I didn't understand it then." Eric insisted. "I thought it was just an anomaly, some ancient relic. I didn't know it connected to your people." Rena stepped back, her violet eyes blazing. "You've lied to me from the beginning." Eric stood, his hands raised in surrender. "No, I swear. I didn't know the full truth until now. But this is bigger than us. If we can activate the network, we can end this war." Rena's heart wavered. Every instinct told her to walk away, to leave him and the burden of this discovery behind. But deep down, she knew he was right. "What do we need to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Eric exhaled in relief. "We need to find the other temples." The star map showed 5 of them scattered across the sector. "If we can activate them all, it should trigger the transmission." "And if we fail?" Rena asked. Eric's expression darkened. "Then the war continues, and we lose the last chance to stop it." Activating the first temple had not gone unnoticed. As Rena and Eric fled the ruins, the air was filled with the low growl of approaching human gunships. They barely reached Eric's hidden hovercraft before the first salvo of missiles struck the forest. They found us too quickly, Rena shouted over the roar of the engines. They must have been tracking you. Or they detected the temple's activation, Eric said, maneuvering the craft through the dense trees. Either way, we need to lose them. The hovercraft banked hard as explosions tore through the canopy. Rena clung to her seat, her stomach lurching with every turn. We can't outrun them forever, she yelled. I don't plan to, Eric replied. He reached into the control panel and pressed a sequence of buttons. The hovercraft's rear hatch opened, revealing a cluster of improvised mines. Hold on, he warned. Rena barely had time to brace herself before Eric released the mines. The explosion rocked the craft, sending a shockwave through the forest. The pursuing gunships veered off course, two of them spiraling into the trees. Rena glared at him. You said you weren't a soldier. I'm not, Eric said, his hands gripping the controls, but I learned to survive. Their victory was short-lived. As they broke through the forest's edge, a human cruiser loomed on the horizon. Its weapons glowed ominously, ready to fire. They've called reinforcements, Rena muttered. Eric clenched his jaw. We'll have to take the long way. He steered the hovercraft toward a ravine, plunging them into its depths. The cruiser's weapons fired, but the beams dissipated against the rocky walls. For now, they were safe. The ravine led them to an abandoned Lycian settlement, its structures crumbling and overgrown with alien vegetation. They set up camp in one of the larger buildings, its walls still etched with faded murals depicting Lycian life before the war. Rena traced her fingers over the images, her mind awash with memories. This was my people's home, she said softly, before your kind destroyed it. Eric didn't respond. He busied himself with repairing the hovercraft, his shoulders heavy with unspoken guilt. Why are you really doing this? Rena asked, breaking the silence. Eric looked up, his eyes tired but resolute. Because I'm tired of being part of something I don't believe in. I joined the medics to save lives, not destroy them. And if we can end this war, maybe I can finally make amends for what my people have done. Rena wanted to argue, to cling to her anger, but the sincerity in his voice made her hesitate. We're running out of time, she said instead. The longer we stay here, the closer they'll get. Eric nodded. We'll leave at first light. The next temple isn't far. If we can make it through the mountains. The journey to the second temple was grueling. The mountains were treacherous, their jagged peaks lashed by freezing winds. Rena's small frame shivered beneath her cloak, but she pressed on, driven by a growing sense of purpose. When they finally reached the temple, it was buried beneath a glacier. Only the topmost spire protruded from the ice, its surface glittering in the weak sunlight. How are we supposed to activate it? Rena asked. Eric pulled a small device from his pack, a thermal drill salvaged from his medic ship. With this, the drilling took hours, but eventually, they breached the temple's core. Inside, they found machinery similar to the first temple, though much of it was damaged. This place has been dormant for centuries, Eric said, wiping frost from a control panel. We'll have to bypass half the systems to make it work. Rena placed her pendant on the console, its glow illuminating the chamber. The machinery hummed to life, but the activation process was slower than before. As the transmission began, the temple trembled violently. What's happening? Rena shouted. They've found us, Eric said grimly, pointing to the shadow of approaching gunships on the glacier. The activation sequence was incomplete, but there was no time to finish it. Eric grabbed Rena's arm. We have to go. Now. The bitter cold sliced through the air like a blade as Rena and Eric scrambled through the jagged ice fields beyond the second temple. The whine of approaching gunships grew louder, their searchlights sweeping across the glacier like predators seeking prey. The activation had been incomplete, leaving them with only fragments of the transmission. This isn't going to work, Rena shouted, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. It has to, Eric shot back. If we give up now, all of this was for nothing. A beam of light passed dangerously close, igniting the snow around them in a searing flash. Rena hissed, ducking behind a shard of ice as Eric followed. They're not giving up, she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. Neither are we. Eric reached into his pack and retrieved a signal jammer, a small, clunky device he'd salvaged from his medic ship. This won't stop their weapons, but it'll mess with their targeting systems for a few minutes. He activated the jammer and hurled it into the open. A burst of static crackled through the air, and the gunships hesitated, their searchlights flickering. "Move!" Eric shouted, grabbing Rena's arm. They sprinted across the ice, slipping and stumbling as the wind howled around them. Behind them, the gunships began to regroup, their pilots adapting to the interference. "We need cover," Rena yelled. "There." Eric pointed to a dark crevasse ahead, its narrow opening barely wide enough for a person to slip through. Rena hesitated. "If it's a dead end, then it's a cold grave," Eric said grimly. "But it's our only chance." Without another word, they plunged into the crevasse, the icy walls pressing in around them. The sound of the gunships faded as they descended deeper, the blue light of the glacier casting eerie reflections on the walls. The crevasse opened into a cavern, its interior shimmering with crystals that pulsed faintly with an otherworldly light. Rena's antennae twitched as a strange sensation washed over her. Something ancient, familiar, and powerful. "This place," she whispered, her voice reverent. Eric scanned the cavern with wide eyes. "This isn't just a natural formation. Someone built this." At the center of the cavern stood a pedestal, its surface etched with the same symbols as the temples. Rena approached it cautiously, her pendant glowing brighter with every step. When she placed her hand on the pedestal, the crystals around them flared to life, casting the cavern in a kaleidoscope of colors. A holographic figure appeared, a tall, ethereal being with features that seemed to blur between Lycian and human. Its voice was melodic but commanding. "Welcome, descendants of the stars." Rena froze. "Who are you?" The figure tilted its head, as if studying her. "I am Kiriath, an echo of the first civilization. We are the architects of the network you seek to restore." Eric stepped forward, his breath catching. You're the ones who scattered us?" Kiriath's gaze shifted to him. "We did not scatter you. We saved you. Our civilization was on the brink of annihilation, and so we sent our children to the stars, carrying the hope of survival. But why didn't you come back for us?" Rena demanded, her voice trembling with anger. "The catastrophe was greater than we anticipated," Kiriath said. "By the time we attempted to reconnect, your worlds had diverged too far. Fear and mistrust took root, and we could not interfere without worsening the conflict." Eric shook his head. "Then why leave the temples? Why give us this chance now?" Kiriath's form flickered. "The war threatens to destroy all that remains. The network was designed to unify, to remind you of your shared origin. But it requires a catalyst, someone who carries the spark of both heritages." Rena stared at the hologram in disbelief. "You're saying me? Your genetic makeup is unique," Kiriath said. "The pendant you carry is not merely an heirloom. It is the key to fully activating the network." Eric looked at her, his expression torn between awe and concern. "Rena, this could end the war. Or it could destroy me," she said bitterly. "The choice is yours," Kiriath said. "But know this, the war will not end without you." The hologram vanished, leaving Rena and Eric in the flickering glow of the crystals. Before they could process what they had learned, the distant rumble of engines echoed through the cavern. "They're here," Rena said, her voice tight. Eric pulled her away from the pedestal. "We need to go. Now." They retraced their steps through the crevasse, emerging into the icy wasteland. The gunships were circling above, their searchlights scanning the ground. "We'll never make it to the next temple like this," Eric said, his voice grim. Rena's mind raced. She looked at the pendant, its glow dim but steady. "The network, it's partially active now, right?" Eric nodded. "The signal's weak, but yeah. Why?" Rena hesitated, then tightened her grip on the pendant. "If I can amplify it, maybe I can use it to scramble their systems long enough for us to escape." Eric's eyes widened. "That could work. But how do you amplify it?" She looked back toward the cavern. "The crystals. They react to the network's energy." Eric glanced at the gunships, then back at her. "We don't have much time. Do it." Rena ran back into the cavern, the pendant pulsing with increasing intensity. She placed it on the pedestal, her hands trembling as she concentrated. The crystals around her flared to life, their light coalescing into a beam that shot through the cavern roof and into the sky. Outside, the gunships faltered, their engines sputtering as the beam disrupted their systems. Eric watched in awe as one by one, the craft veered off course, their pilots struggling to maintain control. Inside the cavern, Rena felt a surge of energy course through her body. The pendant glowed brighter, its power intertwining with her very being. She gasped as visions filled her mind. Flashes of ancient civilizations, the fall of the First Empire, and the scattering of her ancestors. When the beam finally subsided, she staggered back, her legs weak. Eric caught her as she emerged from the cavern, her face pale but determined. "It worked," he said, relief washing over him. "For now," Rena said, her voice quiet. "But the network is incomplete. We need to reach the next temple before they recover." The wind howled as Rena and Eric made their way across the barren tundra, their breath frosting in the cold air. The gunships had retreated for now, but the reprieve felt fragile, as though the enemy's gaze still lingered on them. The pendant around Rena's neck was dim now, its light flickering faintly like the last embers of a dying fire. She clutched it absently, the memories of the visions she had seen still fresh in her mind. "What did you see back there?" Eric asked as they trudged onward. Rena hesitated, her steps slowing. "It was everything. The rise and fall of the first civilization, the scattering of our ancestors, the pain of the divide. And something else." Eric looked at her, concern etched into his face. "What else?" "A warning," she said softly. "The network is powerful, but if it falls into the wrong hands, it could destroy both our people." Eric frowned. "Then we can't let that happen. We need to stay ahead of them, finish activating the temples before they catch us." Rena nodded, but her heart felt heavy. The visions had shown her more than just history. They had revealed her own potential, a raw power connected to the network itself. She didn't fully understand it, but she feared what it might demand of her. After days of grueling travel, they reached the location of the third temple. It was hidden deep within a canyon, its entrance carved into the red rock like a wound in the earth. The air was thick with tension as they approached, their steps echoing in the stillness. "This one feels different," Rena murmured, her antennae twitching. Eric nodded, his hand resting on the blaster he had reluctantly taken from a fallen soldier. "Stay alert." The temple's interior was darker than the others, its walls covered in vines that seemed to pulse faintly with bioluminescent light. As they ventured deeper, the air grew warmer, carrying a faint hum that resonated in Rena's chest. At the heart of the temple, they found another pedestal, but this one was surrounded by massive, ancient machines that throbbed with dormant energy. "This is more advanced than the others," Eric said, awe creeping into his voice. Rena approached the pedestal cautiously, her pendant glowing brighter with each step. When she placed it on the surface, the machinery roared to life, filling the chamber with a deep, resonant hum. Suddenly, the temple began to shake. Rena staggered back as the walls lit up with symbols, lines of energy converging on the central console. "What's happening?" Eric shouted over the noise. "The activation is drawing power from the network," Rena said, her voice tight. "But it's unstable." The machinery sputtered, sparks flying as the symbols on the walls began to shift. Rena could feel the energy pulling at her, as though it recognized her as part of the system. "You have to stabilize it," Eric yelled. Rena closed her eyes, focusing on the connection she felt with the network. She reached out with her mind, willing the energy to calm. Slowly, the trembling subsided, and the symbols stopped shifting. The activation sequence completed with a final pulse of light, sending another fragment of the transmission into the stars. But before they could celebrate, a voice echoed through the chamber. "You've gone too far." Rena and Eric spun around, weapons raised. A tall figure stepped from the shadows, clad in a sleek, black exosuit. The helmet retracted, revealing a woman with sharp features and piercing green eyes. "Who are you?" Eric demanded. The woman smirked. "Commander Lyra of the United Earth Fleet." And you've just made yourself very interesting to my superiors. Rena's antennae bristled. If you're here to stop us, you're too late. Stop you? Lyra's smirk widened. On the contrary, I've been following you to ensure you succeed, though you've been making it far messier than I'd prefer. Eric frowned. Why would someone from the fleet want us to succeed? Lyra stepped closer, her expression turning serious. Because I'm tired of this war. The generals, the admirals, they don't care about peace. They want control. But if this network is activated, it could end the fighting on terms they can't manipulate. Rena narrowed her eyes. Why should we trust you? You shouldn't, Lyra admitted. But you don't have much of a choice. The fleet's elite forces are closing in on this location, and if we don't leave now, neither of us will make it to the next temple. Eric exchanged a glance with Rena. We can't afford to waste time arguing, he said. Reluctantly, Rena nodded. Fine, but if you try anything, you'll kill me. Got it, Lyra said dryly. Now move. I've got a ship nearby. Lyra led them to a sleek, stealth-capable vessel hidden in the canyon. Once aboard, she quickly powered up the ship and launched into the skies, evading the approaching fleet forces with practiced ease. As the ship slipped into orbit, Rena couldn't help but feel the tension simmering between them. Why do I feel like you're not telling us everything? She asked, her voice sharp. Lyra glanced at her. Because I'm not. But the less you know, the safer you'll be. For now, focus on what matters. Reaching the next temple. Eric frowned. And what happens after we activate the network? Lyra's expression darkened. That depends on how the galaxy reacts. Some will embrace the truth. Others will fight harder to suppress it. Either way, we'll be lighting a fire that can't be extinguished. Rena stared out the viewport, her thoughts heavy. The weight of her role in this mission pressed down on her like a crushing tide. Could she really bear the responsibility of uniting two species, or breaking them apart forever? As they charted a course for the fourth temple, the stars outside seemed colder, more distant. The journey was far from over, and the greatest challenges still lay ahead. The fourth temple loomed in the dense jungles of a planet shrouded in perpetual storms. The air was thick with humidity, and the cries of alien creatures echoed through the canopy. Lyra's ship landed on a clearing barely large enough to accommodate it, the storm's lightning crackling above. We're running out of time, Lyra said as the ship powered down. The fleet knows your pattern. If they guess this is your next target, they'll send everything they have. Then we don't stop, Eric said, shouldering his pack. The temple's entrance was nearly hidden by the thick undergrowth. As they stepped inside, the storm's roar faded, replaced by an eerie stillness. Rena could feel the energy of the network pulsing around her, stronger here than in the other temples. This one feels alive, she murmured. The interior was more advanced than any they'd seen so far. The walls shimmered with flowing light, and the pedestal in the center radiated a soft, golden glow. Rena approached it cautiously, her pendant already reacting, its light bright and steady. Careful, Eric warned. Rena placed the pendant on the pedestal, and the temple came alive. The walls shifted, revealing holograms of star maps, ancient symbols, and data streams. The entire chamber seemed to hum with anticipation. But the peace was short-lived. An explosion rocked the temple, shaking dust from the ceiling. They found us, Lyra growled, drawing her weapon. Fleet forces stormed the temple, their black-armored soldiers fanning out in a coordinated assault. Eric fired back, covering Rena as she worked to stabilize the activation sequence. Lyra moved with lethal precision, her blaster cutting down enemies with clinical efficiency. We can't hold them off forever, Eric shouted, ducking behind a pillar. Rena's fingers danced over the controls, her mind in a desperate race against time. The pendant glowed brighter, syncing with the temple systems. The network was nearly complete, but the final activation required more power she didn't have. Unless, the realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. She was the key, not just the pendant, but her. The network's energy resonated with her because she was part of it, a living link between two civilizations. Rena, Eric called out as a blast narrowly missed her. We have to go. No, she shouted. tears streaming down her face. I have to finish this. She placed her hands on the pedestal, feeling the energy surge through her. Pain lanced through her body as the network drew on her life force, connecting the temples in a final, desperate push. The room erupted with light. The soldiers stopped in their tracks, shielding their eyes as the energy surged outward, cascading through the walls and into the sky. A brilliant beam shot into space, connecting to the other temples and forming a lattice of light across the sector. Across the galaxy, the transmission reached every corner. Holograms appeared in cities, villages, and battlefields, showing the shared history of humans and Lycians. The truth spread like wildfire, breaking through decades of propaganda and hatred. On the battlefield, soldiers from both sides hesitated, their weapons falling limp as they saw the faces of their ancient ancestors, united as one. The vision of unity struck at the core of their beings, sowing doubt and remorse in their hearts. In the fleet's command center, admirals stared at the transmission in stunned silence. Their carefully constructed lies unraveled in an instant. The light in the temple faded, leaving the chamber eerily quiet. Eric rushed to Rena's side, catching her as she collapsed. Her body was weak, her skin pale, but her eyes shone with a quiet determination. "Did it work?" she whispered. Eric nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it, Rena. It's over." Lyra approached, holstering her weapon. "Not yet. The truth is out, but that doesn't mean the war ends today. Some will fight harder to keep their power." Rena managed a faint smile. "Then they'll lose. The truth is stronger than any weapon." Eric held her close, his heart heavy. "You need to rest. You've given too much." Rena shook her head. "No rest. Not yet. There's still so much to rebuild." Months passed, and the galaxy began to heal. The war didn't end overnight, but skirmishes dwindled as more people embraced the truth. Peace talks emerged from the ashes of old hatred, and alliances formed to rebuild what had been lost. Rena became a symbol of unity, her story spreading across the stars. Though her health never fully recovered from the strain of activating the network, she remained a guiding force, her determination inspiring both humans and Lycians to work together. Eric stayed by her side, his role shifting from protector to healer. Together, they traveled to the remaining temples, ensuring the network remained intact and its message of unity endured. As the galaxy moved forward, Rena often looked to the stars, wondering if the architects of the network could see what they had accomplished. She hoped they would be proud. For the first time in generations, the stars felt closer, not as distant, unfeeling points of light, but as bridges, connections between peoples who were finally beginning to understand they were never truly apart. And so, under a sky no longer stained by war, Rena took her place in history as the orphan who mended the galaxy, one truth at a time.